Listen carefully, because what you're about to hear is not a prediction. It's already happening, quietly, legally, and right in front of everyone. The United States is erasing trillions of dollars in debt without paying it back, and almost no one understands how. Not because it's secret, but because it's hidden behind language so technical that most people stop listening. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why your savings, your paycheck, and your future purchasing power are being reshaped right now. Before we go any further, if you want to understand how money really works behind the headlines, subscribe to Silent Collapse now. This channel breaks down the systems that quietly shape your life long before the news admits something is wrong. Subscribe, because what's coming next will affect everyone who holds dollars. For decades, economists warned that too much government debt would eventually lead to disaster. High debt meant higher interest rates, painful spending cuts, or outright default. But today, that fear has disappeared. You'll hear officials say inflation is manageable, debt is sustainable, and there's no reason to panic. The numbers today would have terrified economists just 20 years ago, yet now they're treated as normal. That's not because the math changed, it's because the rules did. A theory once considered radical has quietly moved from academic papers into real government policy. The idea is simple on the surface. A country that controls its own currency can never truly run out of money. It can always create more. According to this thinking, debt doesn't matter as long as inflation stays under control. Taxes don't fund spending anymore. Spending comes first, and money is created when needed. This theory has a name, but you don't need to remember it. You only need to recognize it in action. When the Federal Reserve bought trillions of dollars in government bonds during recent crises, this wasn't an emergency measure anymore. It was a test run, when the government spent roughly $6 trillion during the pandemic with no serious plan to raise taxes or cut spending later. That wasn't temporary. That was the new model. The debt didn't disappear. It was absorbed by the central bank, quietly transformed into newly created money. Here's the part that's never emphasized. Creating money to pay debt doesn't erase the cost. It simply moves it. When the central bank creates new dollars, the supply of money increases, but the amount of real goods and services does not increase at the same speed. That imbalance makes every existing dollar worth less. The government's debt burden shrinks in real terms, but the loss is paid by everyone holding cash, earning wages, or saving for the future. This isn't a tax you vote on. There's no bill passed by Congress, no announcement that your money will be worth less next year. It happens through policy decisions described as technical adjustments or market stabilization. Wealth is transferred silently from savers to the state, and by the time people notice, the damage is already done. Right now, the Federal Reserve has signaled the return of large-scale bond purchases. $40 billion per month may not sound dramatic compared to the past, but this is how it always begins, small enough to avoid panic, controlled enough to test market reactions. If investors stay calm, the numbers grow. 40 becomes 80. 80 becomes 120. Eventually, the central bank becomes the primary buyer of government debt. But debt monetization alone isn't enough to make tens of trillions of dollars vanish convincingly. There needs to be a story that makes it look responsible, something that creates the appearance of strength instead of desperation. That's where asset revaluation enters the picture. The United States holds assets that are not valued at market prices on its official balance sheet. Some of these assets have barely changed in accounting value for decades, and that creates an opportunity. Not to create real wealth, but to create the appearance of it. Take gold. Officially, the U.S. holds over 8,000 tons. On government books, that gold is valued at just over $400 per ounce, a price set more than 50 years ago. In real markets, gold trades many times higher. If the government chose to revalue gold for accounting purposes, trillions of dollars would appear instantly on paper without acquiring a single new ounce. This has happened before. During the Great Depression, the government redefined the value of gold overnight. Nothing physical changed, no gold was discovered, but the balance sheet suddenly looked stronger, and that illusion helped justify massive monetary expansion. Now consider digital assets. The government already holds a significant amount of seized cryptocurrency. At today's prices, it's a footnote. But prices don't need to stay where they are if policy changes. By declaring certain assets as strategic reserves and assigning them official values, balance sheets can be reshaped without changing reality. This isn't about believing in any asset, it's about accounting. Change the number, change the story. Combine that with aggressive money creation, and suddenly the debt appears manageable. On paper, assets rise. In reality, purchasing power falls. Internationally, the consequences are even more serious. Foreign governments hold trillions of dollars in US debt. When that debt is monetized, they are repaid in weaker currency, not through default, but through dilution, and they see it coming. That's why countries are slowly moving away from dollar dependence. Treasury holdings are shrinking. Trade agreements are shifting toward local currencies. New payment systems are being built outside the dollar-based framework. This isn't ideology, it's self-defense. Central banks around the world are buying gold at the fastest pace in decades, not because they expect growth, but because they expect instability. They are preparing for a system where trust in paper promises weakens and tangible reserves matter again. At the same time, another pillar supporting global dollar demand is eroding. Energy. For 50 years, oil trade required dollars. That created constant global demand. But that system is weakening. Electric vehicles are spreading rapidly. Energy markets are diversifying. As oil demand peaks and trade patterns change, fewer dollars are needed to keep the world running. When global demand for dollars falls, those dollars don't disappear. They return home. That means more money chasing the same domestic economy. Inflation doesn't just come from printing. It comes from money coming back. The timeline is not distant. The window where the US can inflate away debt without immediate consequences is closing. That's why policies are accelerating now, not later. Once reserve currency status weakens significantly, the ability to export inflation disappears. What happens next won't be announced as a crisis. It will be framed as responsible management. Stability operations. Necessary adjustments. The language will be calm. The impact will not be. Within a few years, debt levels will reach numbers that cannot be addressed through growth or taxation. At that point, there are only two paths: open default, which would collapse global confidence instantly, or controlled inflation disguised as policy. The choice has already been made. This is not a sudden collapse, it's a silent one. Spread across years. Hidden in technical language. Paid for slowly by every dollar you hold. If this made you think differently about money, share this video, not to spread fear, but awareness, and comment below what you think happens next, because these conversations matter more than ever. This is silent collapse. And this isn't the end. It's the beginning of the repricing. What makes this moment different from every financial crisis before it is speed. In the past, these shifts happened slowly, over generations. Today, policy moves that once took decades are happening in months. Markets are conditioned to accept emergency actions as normal behavior. What used to be called extraordinary is now routine, and when everything feels routine, people stop asking questions. Most Americans still believe inflation is an accident, a side effect, something caused by supply chains, wars, or corporate greed. But inflation at this scale is not an accident. It is a tool, a deliberate mechanism used when debt becomes unpayable through honest means. Instead of admitting the system is overloaded, the value of money itself is adjusted downward until the debt feels smaller. This is why official inflation numbers never match lived reality. Rent, food, insurance, healthcare, education, these are not luxuries. They are necessities. And they rise faster than wages year after year. Not because companies are evil, but because the unit used to price everything is being quietly weakened. People are told to invest more, take more risk, speculate just to stay in place. Saving is punished. Caution is punished. Stability becomes impossible without exposure to volatile assets. That is not a healthy system. It is a forced adaptation. What's even more dangerous is how invisible this feels in real time. There is no single moment where alarms go off. No official announcement that your money now buys less by design. The change is gradual enough to avoid outrage, but fast enough to permanently reshape wealth distribution. Those closest to the source of money creation adapt first. Institutions, large asset holders, governments. Everyone else reacts later when prices have already moved. By then, the transfer is complete. This is why the conversation around sound money is returning after decades of silence. Not because people are nostalgic, but because trust is eroding. When trust in currency weakens, societies change behavior. Spending accelerates. Time horizons shrink, social tension rises, and political pressure follows. History shows this pattern clearly. Not collapse overnight, but normalization of decline. Each year feels slightly worse than the last, but never bad enough to force immediate reform. Until suddenly, it is. The most unsettling part is that none of this requires bad intentions. Every decision can be justified individually. Market stability, employment, growth, liquidity. But together they form a system that feeds on the future to survive the present. And here's the part few people are ready to hear. There is no painless exit. Reversing this process would require acknowledging losses, shrinking balance sheets, and accepting short-term pain. That is politically impossible. So the path of least resistance continues. The question isn't whether change is coming, it's who pays for it. If you're still watching, you already understand more than most. And if this perspective challenged what you've been told, let others hear it too. Share this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and stay connected to this channel. Because silence is how this collapse works, and awareness is the only thing that slows it down.